Does any known moral code permit slavery? Abolitionists would say no, and they would not stop there. They argued that slave owners and their supporters committed moral turpitude. To remove the evils of slavery from society required the redemptive power of emancipation. Of course, Southerners would shun such talk. The Bible itself, they contended, condoned the peculiar institution of slavery. With the abolitionist movement gaining strength each year, questioning the morality of slavery, Southerners could no longer describe slavery as a necessary evil. They found themselves forced to describe slavery as a positive good. On February 1st, 1836, on the floor of the House, Congressman James Henry Hammond from South Carolina proclaimed the first explicit defense of slavery as constituting a positive good. He declared, "Slavery is said to be an evil, but is no evil. On the contrary, I believe it to be the greatest of all the great blessings which a kind providence has bestowed upon our glorious region. As a class, I say it boldly, there is not a happier, more contented race upon the face of the earth." 1 year later, the South's most incredible force of nature, John C. Calhoun, would deliver his speech on the floor of the U.S. Senate, attempting to disarm the abolitionists' moral outrage over slavery. Calhoun had famously championed states' rights, low tariffs, limited government, and nullification. In his passionate and elegant address delivered on February 6, 1837, Calhoun demanded that Southerners stop apologizing for slavery. "I appeal to the facts," he said. "Never before has the black race of Central Africa, from the dawn of history to the present day, attained a condition so civilized and so improved, not only physically, but morally and intellectually." He proclaimed the relation now existing in the slaveholding states between the two races is a good, a positive good. During the Nullification Crisis, South Carolina had ignored the tariff of 1828 and 1832. The Force Bill allowed President Jackson to deploy the Army to South Carolina to enforce the compliance with the law. Calhoun argued that that action aroused the dormant spirit of abolitionism. Also, Calhoun noted that while the incendiary spirit of abolitionism has spread, it has not yet infected this body. Of course, he was referring to the United States Senate. And that might have been true, but it was not true in the House of Representatives. Hi, I'm Tom Army, and this is U.S. History Online's next episode in our series, Causes of the American Civil War, the Gag Rule and its Offspring. Notwithstanding Hammond and Calhoun's declaration of slavery as a positive good, anti-slavery petitions continued to flood Congress. Slavery posed a menacing problem. Northern and Southern Democrats, in addition to some Northern and Southern Whigs, concluded the petitions must be stopped. The solution proved simple. Silence the abolitionists with a gag rule. Starting in 1836 with the Pinckney Resolutions, the House of Representatives tabled any anti-slavery petition, resolution, memorial, or paper. Unfortunately, this strategy, designed to hold the Union together by protecting slavery, instead began to break it apart. Congress had opened Pandora's box. The gag rule was not a standing House rule. The House had to renew it each session. John C. Calhoun attempted to create a Senate gag rule, but his fellow pro-slavery senators feared it would only strengthen the abolitionist movement. Instead, they adopted a nuanced procedural method. If someone presented an anti-slavery petition, the Senate would vote to consider accepting the petition. They would not vote on the petition itself. The Senate never voted in favor of accepting any petition. Northern Whigs in the House were vocal critics of the gag rule. Inspired by the abolition of slavery in the British Empire in 1833, congressmen like William Slade of Vermont and Joshua Giddings of Ohio were unafraid of the consequences of sharing their anti-slavery views with their colleagues on the floor of the House. There were consequences for doing this. Zealots threatened Giddings' life on several occasions. John Dawson of Louisiana threatened to cut Giddings' throat with the knife he always carried. The person who led the challenge on the gag rule was the intrepid congressman from Massachusetts, John Quincy Adams. For 8 years that the gag rule lasted, former President Adams attacked it. He exhibited courage, sharpness, and resolution. As historian Daniel Walker Howe pointed out, Adams persistently criticized, evaded, subverted, and undermined the gag rule. He presented himself as defending not the substance of the abolitionist views, but their constitutional right of petition. Of course, physical and verbal threats came his way. In 1838, Ratcliffe Boone almost punched Adams, but stood down at the last minute. Southern attempts to gag abolitionist petitions had 3 unintended consequences. First, the gag rule inspired abolitionists to become more adept at circulating petitions, and their numbers swelled. Second, Adams' efforts to get around the rule made for great press coverage. Historian Joanne B. Freeman wrote, ironically, the campaign to gag Adams was spreading his message by offering the world an image of screaming, stomping, threatening slaveholders imposing their will. Third, the gag rule may not have advanced the cause of immediate emancipation. Northerners, especially those politically moderate, however, began to view the slavery issue differently. Some converted to the abolitionist argument. Others came to see the gag rule and the violence in the House of Representatives as an attack on Northerners' fundamental rights of petition, representation, and free speech. And this was key. Ideas about the slave question, abolition, black equality, and liberty grew varied and complex across the nation. 5 camps emerged. 1. Southerners and Northerners who adamantly opposed abolition and black equality. 2. Abolitionists who demanded immediate emancipation and black equality. 3. Northerners who quietly called for gradual emancipation and continued efforts to colonize blacks. 4. Northerners who developed a fear their First Amendment rights were in jeopardy. And 5. Northerners and Westerners ambivalent to the natural rights of blacks, but who felt that slavery threatened republicanism and white freehold farming. This latter group would eventually form the Free Soil Party. Between 1837 and 1844, events demonstrated this multiplicity of views, ideas, and passions across the young nation. For example, the economic panic of 1837 increased Western migration, moving farmers into Iowa, Wisconsin, and the Minnesota and Nebraska territories. These farmers sought land and new opportunities. To them, slavery was a danger. Farmer Abijah Beckworth of New York wrote, "To the great mass of the people, slavery threatened the general and equal distribution of our lands into convenient family farms." In 1838, however, Pennsylvania joined Connecticut, New York, and Tennessee in rescinding the rights of free blacks to vote. Every state that entered the Union between 1800 and 1860, except Maine, limited the right to vote just to whites. In Philadelphia, a white mob set the new abolitionist meeting house ablaze. Then in 1842, the United States Supreme Court's decision in Prigg versus Pennsylvania held that the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 invalidated a Pennsylvania state law that prevented blacks from being taken out of this free state and back into slavery. At the same time, the court weakened the law's enforcement mechanism by allowing states to forbid their officials from cooperating in the return of fugitive slaves. To the consternation of Southern slave owners, more states wrote laws increasing personal liberty. Despite all the machinations around the slave question, most white Americans enjoyed the benefits of the nation's economic progress. Perhaps abolitionists would go away. Growth, wealth, opportunity, and expansion were the buzzwords of the day. America had new resources to discover, new land to conquer and explore. And according to Herman Melville, in his classic allegorical novel, The Confidence Man, more people to con. In 1838, Alexis de Tocqueville wrote, "The passions that stir the Americans most deeply are commercial and not political ones." So as Congress finally found enough votes to repeal the gag rule in 1844, and the country prepared for another presidential election, the issue of expansion in Oregon and Texas annexation dominated everyone's concern. To annex Texas, we would have to seize land that legally belonged to Mexico. America's failure to address slavery with integrity, plus morally dubious efforts to annex Texas, had far-reaching consequences for this nation.